All right. Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We're going to be looking at something pretty incredible today. Um,
Yeah,
and it's a little bit of a somber topic, but it's one of those things that I think is super important to cover,
for sure.
especially because I think a lot of people don't realize, um, we hear about the Vietnam War,
Right.
but I think a lot of people don't realize it's still kind of happening.
Absolutely. And the effects are still very real for a lot of folks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got this article that we're going to dive into today.
Yeah.
It's called Remains of Pilot Lost Over Vietnam Nearly 60 Years Ago Identified.
Wow.
So this is a pretty long time, and it's really going to highlight the dedication and the work that goes into accounting for our missing personnel.
I think that's a really crucial point. Sometimes these stories feel like they're from a bygone era,
Right?
but this shows just how relevant and important this work still is today.
Absolutely. And, you think about the families that are involved,
Oh, of course.
the decades of not knowing what happened to their loved ones. It's an incredible story.
Yeah. It really highlights the human cost of conflict that goes far beyond the battlefield.
Right. So let's jump right in. This article talks about Lieutenant Colonel Donald W. Downing,
Okay.
and he disappeared back in September of 1967.
1967. Wow.
Yeah, so this was during an armed night reconnaissance mission
Oh, wow. Night reconnaissance.
over what was then called the Democratic Republic of Vietnam.
So pretty dangerous stuff.
Very much so. And he was piloting an F-4C Phantom II.
Okay, so those are pretty iconic aircraft from the Vietnam War.
Powerful, powerful jets.
Yeah, they saw a lot of action.
Right. And the article mentions that another plane in his formation reported seeing a midair fireball,
Oh gosh.
but there was no further communication.
I can't even imagine what must have been going through their minds at that moment.
I know, it would have been just terrifying. And I
Yeah,
think it's important to remember these weren't just machines. These were people
absolutely.
with families and lives and
Yeah, each one of those represents a whole life cut short.
absolutely. And initially he was listed as missing in action.
Right, makes sense.
He was posthumously promoted to lieutenant colonel
Mm-hmm.
and then finally declared dead in April of 1978.
So even that took years.
Right, and it seems like that would be the end of the story.
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
But it's actually not.
So what happened?
The search efforts actually continued for decades.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, the article says that it wasn't until last year, 2024, that a recovery team working in Quang Binh Province, Vietnam,
Okay.
they discovered life support equipment wreckage from the F-4C and, most importantly, bone tissue.
So they were actually able to find physical remains after all these years.
It's amazing, isn't it? And,
Yeah.
to think about the conditions they must be working in.
Oh, yeah. Quang Binh Province was heavily bombed during the war.
Exactly.
So I imagine it's still a very dangerous place.
It must be full of unexploded ordnance.
Right. You've got the effects of weather time, the
Yeah.
jungle.
And not to mention just the emotional weight of what they're doing.
Absolutely. They're not just digging up pieces of metal, they're searching for evidence of someone's life.
Right. And it's not just finding the remains, it's also the identification process.
Right. Because how do you connect those remains to Lieutenant Colonel Downing after so many years?
Right. Well, that's where things get really interesting.
I'm all ears.
So the article talks about the Defense POWMIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA.
Okay, I've heard of them. They do amazing work.
They really do. And they were able to use DNA testing on the bone tissue
Wow.
to positively identify Lieutenant Colonel Downing.
That's incredible to think that we have that technology now.
I know. It's just remarkable how far things have come.
And it really underscores the commitment to bringing closure to these families.
Right. Because even after all these years, the family now has the opportunity to lay him to rest
Finally.
with full military honors.
That's powerful.
The article mentions that they're planning to hold a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery.
Wow, what a fitting tribute.
I know the date hasn't been set yet, but
But just the fact that it's happening at all is incredible.
it's amazing, and it really speaks volumes about the DPAA and their mission.
And it's not just about Lieutenant Colonel Downing, right?
Right.
They're working to account for all missing personnel from past conflicts.
They're still out there searching, identifying, bringing closure,
It makes you think about all the families who are still waiting.
still hoping for that same kind of resolution.
It's a reminder that the impact of war continues long after the fighting stops.
Absolutely. And it leaves you wondering, how many more stories like this are out there?
How many more families are still waiting for answers?
And it makes you appreciate the dedication of those who are working to bring them home.
To give them the peace of mind they deserve.
It's a powerful reminder that even after all these years, we still have a responsibility to those who served.
and to their families who sacrifice so much.
It's a story that stays with you,
It really does.
and it makes you think about the true cost of war.
The cost that continues to be paid even decades later.
And it leaves you wondering, what can we do to make sure that no family has to wait 60 years for answers?
What can we do to honor the sacrifices made by those who serve and their families?
It's a question worth pondering.
Absolutely a question we should all be asking ourselves.
So that's our deep dive for today.
It's been a heavy but important one.
It really has. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Until then, take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.